The roar of the Pacific wind rolled across the deck of USS Helena as Lieutenant Samuel Harker leaned over the rail, watching the waves shear into pale green shards beneath the bow. Dawn had not yet broken, but the eastern horizon glowed with the faint ember-orange promise of sunrise. The ship trembled with energy, engines humming like a giant heart in the dark. Harker tightened his coat and closed his eyes. This, he thought, was the quietest the world ever became, right before someone shattered it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Below deck, in the Combat Information Center, the new proximity fuses sat in wooden crates, marked with codes only a handful of men fully understood. Cylindrical, unassuming. Each one housed the secret that engineers and physicists had said could never work. A tiny radio transmitter and receiver inside an artillery shell capable of sensing its target and detonating at precisely the right distance. Impossible, some had called it. Witchcraft, others said. Harker knew only one thing. If it worked, it could change everything in a sky ruled by steel and fire. Harker wasn't supposed to be on Helena. He was an engineer first, a gunnery officer second, and the Navy had pulled him from a stateside research lab only 3 months earlier. Back then, his worst injury came from tripping over scattered vacuum tubes. Now, his daily scenery consisted of Japanese scout planes circling like hungry hawks and the distant thunder of naval gunfire bouncing across island chains. He sometimes wondered if he was still the same man. But he didn't wonder long. War gave little room to examine the pieces. It broke off you. At 0453 hours, Captain LaSalle strode onto the bridge, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hand. "Harker," he said without turning his head, "today's the day we see whether your little radio shells are miracles or myths." Harker straightened. "Aye, sir. I don't like unknowns," LaSalle muttered, scanning the waters as though expecting the enemy to materialize from the ripples. "But intelligence says we'll face a heavy flight group at first light, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, scouts, maybe more. And after last week," his voice thinned. No one had forgotten the burning silhouettes of 2 American destroyers still visible in memory, their decks broken, the sea swallowing the last cries of their crews. The captain took a long sip. "We're outnumbered, so we'll use whatever cards we have left, even the untested ones." The horizon brightened. Harker closed his fingers around the railing and tried to steady his breathing. At 0515, radar operators reported the first blips, 20 miles, altitude rising, then 15, then 10. The klaxon wailed across Helena like a metallic scream. Sailors sprinted to stations, lookouts scanned the sky through binoculars. Ammunition crews rolled crates across the deck, boots pounding with the rhythm of desperation. Harker rushed to the forward turret, where Chief Gunner's mate O'Rourke was already cursing at a jammed feed tray. "You're early," O'Rourke grunted, without looking up. "No," Harker said, strapping himself into the seat. "We're late." The first formation appeared as specks against the morning sun. Aichi D-3A dive bombers, elegant and deadly. Their wings glinted like razor blades as they descended. The second formation, slower and broader, followed behind. Nakajima B-5N torpedo planes. If these made it to the waterline, Helena would be finished. "Open fire!" LaSalle's voice boomed from the bridge. Helena's anti-aircraft guns erupted in layers. 50-caliber guns rattled first, spitting streams of glowing tracers into the sky. Then the 40mm Bofors lit up, thumping with deep-bellied force. Harker's 5-inch guns waited, steady, hungry, crafted for precision rather than panic. "Load proximity," Harker ordered. O'Rourke hesitated for a heartbeat. The men exchanged a quick look. Fear, hope, doubt, all tangled together. Then the chief slammed the first shell into the breach. "Aye, Lieutenant. Proximity rounds loaded." Harker took aim. The bombers grew larger now, details sharpening, red circles painted on wings, engines snarling, the cold glint of bombs beneath their bellies. He felt the turret quake as the elevation gears aligned. "Fire!" The gun spat flame. The shell vanished into the brightening sky. For a long second, nothing happened. Then a flash. A white burst bloomed not from direct impact, but beside the bomber, a sphere of fire that ripped through its wing. The aircraft shuddered, spiraled, and tore apart in midair. A cheer rose from the deck, but only for a moment, because the rest of the formation kept coming. "Again, faster!" Harker barked. The team loaded, fired. Each proximity shell detonated near its target, shredding metal, ripping apart formations, forcing bombers to veer wildly. The sky became a chaotic canvas of smoke clouds and falling shapes. Harker worked without thought, without pause, body running on instinct. Sweat stung his eyes, his shoulder bruised against the recoil seat. Every few rounds, O'Rourke shouted updates. 2 down, 3, 1's on fire, keep going. But numbers hardly mattered. The waves still rushed forward. A dive bomber broke free and screamed downward, its siren wailing like something alive. Helena jolted as shrapnel rained on the deck. Another bomber exploded in midair too close. Hot metal raked across Harker's cheek, leaving a burning gash. He didn't notice. Adrenaline did not allow pain. The torpedo planes dropped lower now, skimming the water. These were the real killers. If even one torpedo struck Helena broadside, the ship would roll and never recover. "Shift focus to low altitude," Harker yelled. The turret whirled. O'Rourke loaded at a pace that defied human limits. His face red, his hands raw. The shells clattered like the heartbeat of some mechanical beast. Harker fired. The proximity fuse detonated just above the lead torpedo plane. The blast tore off its tail. The aircraft nosed into the ocean, carving a violent splash that swallowed both plane and pilot. 2 more followed. 3 broke off, but 4 remained, and they were close. "Port batteries, take them!" LaSalle roared from the bridge. Helena heaved into a sharp turn, engines screaming. Torpedoes dropped into the water with hollow splashes, their wakes streaked toward the ship like ghostly white knives. "Hold her steady!" someone on the bridge shouted. The ship lurched. Men clung to rails. Harker's heart pounded as he fired again. Another plane disintegrated. Another erupted into flames, but the torpedoes were already racing through the waves. "Brace!" O'Rourke bellowed. Helena swerved, narrowly missing the first torpedo by mere yards. The second swept past the stern. The third detonated prematurely, struck by shrapnel or shaken loose by the ship's wake. But the fourth kept coming, slicing straight toward midship. Every man on deck watched it. Time slowed. Then, an explosion. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But it wasn't the torpedo. It was the bomber that had launched it, or what remained of the bomber, crashing into the water directly above its own weapon. The blast triggered the torpedo, prematurely, producing a plume of white water that drenched Helena's portside. For a moment, no one moved. Then, cheers broke across the ship like a tidal wave. But the battle wasn't over. A second wave appeared on radar. 15 aircraft coming in fast. LaSalle slammed a fist onto the railing. "Damn it, we don't have enough ammunition to fight forever." Harker took a deep breath. "Then we make the next 10 minutes count more than the last 20 years of naval doctrine." LaSalle gave him a sharp look. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. "You're a madman, Lieutenant." "Only when necessary, sir." The second wave descended like shadows, blotting out the sun. Helena's guns thundered again, spitting fire. Smoke curled across the deck. The proximity rounds detonated again and again, bursting among the attackers with terrifying precision. Airplanes broke apart mid-flight, wings severed, engines trailing smoke. But some slipped through. A bomber released its payload directly above Helena. The bomb screamed downward, then vanished in a burst of flame as a proximity round clipped the bomber's fuselage mid-dive, triggering a chain reaction. Another torpedo plane managed to launch its weapon, but the aircraft itself exploded seconds later, spraying burning debris across the water. The crew fought like men possessed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, radar reported the sky clear. The last bomber limped away, trailing smoke disappearing over the horizon. Silence descended slowly, like dust settling after a collapse. Harker slumped against the turret wall, chest heaving. O'Rourke slid down beside him, laughing breathlessly. "Lieutenant, if you ever suggest something impossible again, I'm asking for a transfer." Harker managed a weak smile. "Fair enough." Captain LaSalle approached, his uniform smudged with soot. He looked older, years older, yet his eyes shone with fierce pride. "Harker," he said quietly, "you may have just changed naval warfare forever." Harker shook his head. "Not me, sir. The men who believed enough to try, even when everyone said it wouldn't work." LaSalle nodded slowly. "The enemy will think twice after today." But Harker knew the truth. The enemy would do more than think. They would adapt, evolve, invent new horrors to counter the impossible weapon the Americans had unleashed. War was an arms race, with no finish line, no victor. Not really. Still, for now, they had survived. As the sun finally rose above the Pacific, casting long, golden lines across the waves, Harker looked out over the vast water. Smoke trailed from the horizon like fading scars. The ship creaked beneath his boots, battered but alive. For the first time since he'd boarded Helena, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. The morning wind tasted almost like peace. Almost. He knew the war was far from over. More battles would come. Some worse than this. Some hardly survivable. But somewhere in the chaos, miracles still existed. Sometimes they came packaged inside steel, wires, and vacuum tubes. Sometimes they came in the form of men who refused to give up. He would remember that on the days when hope ran thin. For now, he simply watched the sunrise, letting its warmth wash across his bruised face, and wondered what the next wave of planes, of challenges, of impossible choices would bring. The calm that followed felt fragile, like glass resting on a trembling tabletop. Hours passed as damage control teams swept the decks, patching ruptured lines and extinguishing stubborn pockets of flame. The wounded were carried below, some on stretchers, others supported by shipmates whose faces were grey with exhaustion. Harker moved among them, offering what help he could, a steadying arm, a quiet word spoken into the din of groans and murmured prayers. Near noon, Helena slowed to half speed. The ocean had turned a deep, placid blue, broken only by the churn of the ship's wake. Harker leaned over the railing again, his thoughts drifting. He imagined the Japanese pilots, men his age, perhaps younger, who had plunged into the sea that morning. War blurred the lines between monster and man, until neither seemed fully real. O'Rourke joined him, lighting a cigarette with hands that still trembled. "Hell of a morning," the chief said. Exhaling smoke the wind tore apart instantly. "Hell of a war," Harker replied. They stood in silence. Somewhere, a welder sparked. Somewhere else, a man shouted for more bandages. But around them, the sea remained indifferent, rolling its eternal rhythm beneath a sky washed clean of smoke. A distant call echoed across the deck, summoning officers to the wardroom. Harker straightened his uniform and headed toward the hatch. Whatever awaited them next, new orders or new dangers, he would meet it with the same stubborn resolve that had carried him through the morning's inferno. As he walked, he felt the weight of the day settle into his bones, not as exhaustion alone, but as a strange mixture of burden and purpose. The memory of the proximity blasts still echoed in his ears, each one a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. Yet, beneath the fear, he sensed a quiet pride, an understanding that in the crucible of chaos the crew had found something rare: unity, belief, and the unspoken promise that they would fight just as fiercely tomorrow. And hope lingered despite everything. The wardroom felt strangely small when Harker entered, as though the weight of the morning pressed the steel walls inward. Officers sat around the long table, uniforms torn, faces streaked with grime. Several mugs of untouched coffee cooled beside stacks of damage reports and navigation charts. Captain LaSalle stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on the back of his chair, the other holding a folded dispatch. The murmurs died when he cleared his throat. "Gentlemen," LaSalle said, his voice hoarse but measured, "I wish I could tell you the worst is behind us, but it appears the Imperial Navy didn't send that air group to sink us alone. Recon reports a surface force, cruisers and destroyers, heading toward our position." Fast, a ripple of tension passed through the room. Harker's stomach tightened. Air attacks were chaos, but gun duels, broadside against broadside, were cold, calculating death. A single lucky hit could tear a ship open. A single unlucky one could silence hundreds of men at once. LaSalle continued, "The nearest support group is 12 hours away. We're on our own. Again." The room fell quiet. Commander Riggs, Helena's executive officer, rubbed his temples. "What are we looking at, sir?" "Composition." LaSalle unfolded the dispatch. "A heavy cruiser, 2 light cruisers, and at least 5 destroyers." "That's a pack built for night fighting," Riggs muttered. "If they reach us after sundown." "We won't last 10 minutes, LaSalle finished for him. Harker leaned forward. "What's their distance?" "Estimated 48 miles and closing." Harker inhaled sharply. Helena could fight, but not against those odds. Not battered, low on fuel, with crew casualties mounting, unless... "What about the shells?" Harker said quietly. Riggs frowned. "What shells?" "The proximity fuses," Harker answered. "We tested them on aircraft." "Yes, but in theory..." Riggs cut him off. "No, absolutely not. They weren't designed to detonate over water targets, Lieutenant. They're calibrated for aerial signals. Using them in surface combat would be..." "Insane," Harker offered. "Catastrophic," Riggs snapped. "One bad reading, and the thing goes off the moment it leaves the barrel." Harker turned to LaSalle. "Sir, with respect, we're outnumbered 3-1, with a damaged ship and half our AA ammo spent. If those ships catch us tonight, we're dead, every man aboard. Our only shot is to keep them at distance, force them off, confuse their formations." LaSalle's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "The proximity rounds don't need to strike a hull. If they detonate near open decks or against bridge structures, the shrapnel would rip through exposed crew. And the psychological shock alone. Japanese captains would have no idea what happened. They'd think we had some kind of new flak artillery for surface use." Riggs shook his head. "Or we blow ourselves up trying." "It's possible," Harker admitted. "But if we don't try, we won't see sunrise anyway." Silence settled like dust. LaSalle looked at each man in turn. Then he nodded slowly. "Prepare 1 turret with proximity rounds, only 1. We test them at maximum elevation first. If we see even a hint of premature detonation, we abandon the idea." Riggs exhaled, defeated. "Aye, sir." Harker felt his pulse quicken, not with fear this time, but with the strange clarity that often accompanied impossible decisions. He rose as the others dispersed, heading back toward the deck. O'Rourke met him halfway with a raised brow. "Lieutenant, I don't like that look." "You won't like what comes next, either," Harker replied. "I never do." The crew assembled around turret 2, their expressions tight with dread and curiosity. Harker explained the plan quickly, leaving out the most terrifying probabilities. Sailors nodded, glancing uneasily at the crates being rolled across the deck. O'Rourke patted one of the shells. "This again. If these things don't kill the Japs, they'll kill us first." "They won't," Harker said. "You promise?" "No." O'Rourke grinned grimly. "Good. Just checking." As Helena plowed through the steady Pacific swells, the hours crawled. Lookouts scanned the horizon for masts and gun flashes. Radar stations hummed. The ship's hum felt tighter, strained, as if Helena herself held her breath. Just past 1600 hours, a report came in. "Contact Surface group bearing west-southwest, speed increasing. The deck erupted into action once more. Men rushed to battle stations. Water splashed against buckling hull plates as Helena angled to present her broadside. LaSalle's voice boomed across the ship. "All hands, prepare for surface engagement." Harker climbed into turret 2, strapping himself in. O'Rourke and the crew loaded the first proximity round, carefully, reverently, as though handling a sleeping animal with unpredictable temper. "Elevation set," O'Rourke called. "Fire when ready," LaSalle ordered. Harker pulled the firing lever. The shell screamed skyward. Every man watched, every breath held. Halfway through its arc, a bright flash. The explosion blossomed like a premature firework. Too soon. Harker cursed under his breath. O'Rourke spat. "Back to normal shells?" Harker hesitated. "No. That was expected. We fired too steep. Lower the elevation. Again." The second shot. Fired. Climbed. Held. Held. Then detonated several hundred yards ahead, above the dark line of approaching ships. The burst expanded into a white-hot sphere. Moments later, the radar operator shouted from below, "Enemy ships reducing speed!" Harker felt his chest tighten. It worked. LaSalle's voice echoed through comms. "All forward batteries, commence alternating fire with proximity rounds." Helena's guns ignited the twilight. Each shell's arc traced a glowing path toward the horizon, where the Japanese formation tightened like a spearhead. Then the sky erupted. The proximity blasts tore through the air above the enemy ships. Shrapnel rained onto decks. One destroyer's forward guns went silent. Another veered erratically, smoke pouring from its bridge. Still, the enemy pressed forward. Their guns opened fire, long, low flashes across the horizon. Seconds later, shells whistled toward Helena. The ship shook violently. Splinters shredded lifelines. A section of railing tore free and plunged into the sea. Harker steadied himself and fired again. The turret roared. The deck vibrated with every shot. Enemy rounds crashed closer now, geysers rising around the hull like towering white fists. One shell slammed into the aft deck, ripping apart a winch and sending men sprawling. A fire ignited near the stern. Damage control raced toward it. The Japanese formation fanned out to flank Helena. Gun flashes multiplied, strobes of orange in the darkening dusk. "We can't keep this up," Riggs muttered over comms. Harker fired again. The proximity burst exploded over the lead destroyer, peppering its deck with shrapnel. Men scattered. A gun crew was thrown into the sea. Smoke belched from the vessel as it veered out of line. LaSalle saw the opening instantly. "Helena, hard to starboard. Bring our stern guns to bear." The ship lunged into a tight turn. Harker clung to the grips as his world tilted. Turret 3 opened fire, hammering a Japanese cruiser trying to close the gap. Shells raked its bow, blowing apart a deck-mounted torpedo tube. A secondary explosion rippled across the ship, forcing it to peel away. But Helena wasn't untouched. Another incoming shell slammed into the starboard quarter. The ship groaned. Lights flickered. Smoke thickened across the deck. Men shouted. Pipes burst. The smell of burning insulation filled the air. Harker blinked through the haze. His ears rang, but his hands moved automatically. Load, aim, fire, again and again. The proximity rounds continued bursting above the enemy fleet, each detonation carving confusion into their attack. Then, suddenly, the horizon quieted. The enemy cruisers broke formation. The destroyers pulled back, turning away. Their gun flashes dwindled as they retreated into the deepening darkness. It was over. Slowly, painfully, the sky fell silent. Helena drifted through the settling smoke like a wounded animal, still afloat but listing slightly. Fires crackled on the aft deck, contained but stubborn. Crewmen limped across the deck, carrying wounded shipmates. The air smelled of salt, cordite, and seared metal. Harker slumped against the turret wall, sweat cooling on his skin. His hands shook uncontrollably. O'Rourke dropped down beside him, letting out a long, quivering exhale. "Well," the chief said. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever done. Harker wiped soot from his eyes. Both, I think. LaSalle's voice crackled over the intercom, calm, exhausted, grateful. Helena, well done. All hands stand down from battle stations. Harker allowed himself a slow breath. His ribs ached with each inhale. His cheek throbbed where shrapnel had torn it earlier. His whole body trembled with the aftershocks of adrenaline. But a strange quiet filled his mind. They survived again. Barely. He climbed out of the turret and stepped onto the deck, where the stars had begun to pierce the thin veil of smoke drifting across the sky. The sea had calmed into a dark mirror, reflecting the smouldering glow of the ship's wounds. As he walked toward the bow, he saw sailors gathered in small clusters, bandaging each other, sharing canteens, staring silently into the night. No cheers, no victory cries, just the heavy, shared realization of how close death had come. LaSalle joined him at the rail. "You saved us today," the captain said quietly. Harker shook his head. "We saved each other." LaSalle nodded. "Still, those shells, they shouldn't have worked. Not like that." "I know," Harker said, "but sometimes the impossible only works when there's no other choice." The captain gave a tired smile. "You speak like someone twice your age." "I feel twice my age." LaSalle chuckled softly. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. We'll have to file a report about this whole invention of yours. Something tells me Washington will want to hear it firsthand." Harker stared out at the star-lit ocean. "Washington won't believe it." "No," LaSalle agreed, "but they'll want more of it." As the captain walked away, Harker remained at the rail, letting the wind cool his bruised face. He watched the vast Pacific stretching endlessly in every direction, silent, deceptive, holding secrets beneath its dark surface. He felt the weight of what they had unleashed. A weapon no enemy yet understood, one that might change battles thousands of miles away. He wondered what dawn would bring, and whether Helena would be there to see it. The night air carried the smell of smoke and salted steel, and beneath it all, the subtle thrum of the ship's heartbeat persisted. Wounded, but alive. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, bleeding gold across a churning Pacific that seemed endless, indifferent. Helena creaked and groaned, her battered hull flexing with each swell. Smoke still curled from the aft deck, but damage control teams worked tirelessly, dousing flames, repairing torn cables, and patching splintered metal. The wounded were carried below deck, moans echoing through narrow corridors that smelled of cordite and seawater. Harker made his way through the labyrinthine interior, each step a careful negotiation with exhaustion. Faces passed him, some pale, some streaked with soot and blood, some simply staring with empty eyes at the floor, processing the unimaginable. Each man and woman was a survivor, but survival carried a weight heavier than steel. Riggs met him near the mess hall, his face grim but alive, with that peculiar spark officers seemed to carry even after a near-death experience. "Lieutenant," he said, voice low, "you should report to the bridge. Captain LaSalle wants a full debrief before the fleet catches wind of what went down." Harker nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Understood." The bridge smelled of damp metal and gun oil, the faint tang of smoke still lingering. LaSalle stood over the navigation console, staring at a chart of the surrounding waters, his eyes, sharp beneath tired brows, lifted as Harker entered. "Sit," LaSalle said. "We need to go over what happened. Every detail, the proximity rounds, if everything. Washington will want a report, and this could change the way we fight." Harker swallowed. "Sir, I'll give it to you straight. The proximity fuses, they worked because we adjusted the elevation and timing beyond their standard parameters. The first shot failed, detonated prematurely, but the second, it created the confusion we needed. The enemy was unprepared. Their formations broke. We exploited that. One cruiser and two destroyers took significant damage, enough to make them retreat. LaSalle leaned back, his fingers steepled. And the risks? High. Catastrophic if mistimed. The crew could have been torn apart, the ship could have been destroyed. We gambled with the lives of everyone on board. And yet we survived. LaSalle's lips curled faintly. It's reckless brilliance, or a very expensive miracle. Before Harker could respond, a junior officer burst in. "Sir, enemy aircraft on radar, bearing 270. LaSalle's jaw tightened. "Already?" Harker followed him to the scope. A small formation of Japanese dive bombers approached from the west, low and fast, likely unaware of the previous night's catastrophe. Riggs muttered under his breath, "They must think we're crippled." LaSalle's eyes narrowed. "Let's keep it that way. Helm, evasive maneuvers, AA batteries, stand ready. Let's remind them why Helena is not to be trifled with." The crew sprang into action. The rhythmic hum of engines filled the bridge as the helm obeyed LaSalle's commands, turning the ship into a twisting, rolling target. AA gunners lined the railings, fingers tight around triggers, eyes scanning the sky. Harker returned to Turret 2, checking ammunition and preparing for the incoming dive bombers. The first bomb fell short, splashing into the sea with a roar, sending a wall of water toward the deck. The second came closer, but Helena's evasive roll flung it harmlessly to starboard. Harker's turret fired a rapid succession of proximity bursts. One plane erupted in flames before it could release its payload, twisting violently into the water. O'Rourke leaned over the controls, voice hoarse but exhilarated. "Lieutenant, they're breaking, just like last night." Harker allowed himself a brief, sharp smile. "Keep it up, don't let them regroup." By the time the sun hung high in the sky, the remaining aircraft had either been shot down or veered away, leaving Helena battered but unbroken. LaSalle addressed the crew over the intercom, his voice steady, commanding. "All hands, report to battle stations for a status check. Today, you've shown what discipline, courage, and ingenuity can do. We've survived not by luck alone, but by skill, daring, and trust in one another." As the crew dispersed, Harker found a quiet moment by the rail. The wind whipped salt and smoke across his face, carrying with it the ghosts of the night before, the men who had fallen, the officers who had taken impossible decisions, and the crew who had executed them flawlessly. O'Rourke joined him, carrying a battered canteen. "You're thinking too much, Lieutenant. Come on, drink." Harker took it, and they drank in silence, staring at the endless horizon. "You know," O'Rourke said, "somewhere back in D.C., some pencil pusher is going to try to figure out who deserves the credit. Forget it. The ship, the crew, that's all that matters. Always has been." Harker nodded slowly. "Yeah, but still, I can't help thinking about what comes next." O'Rourke's face hardened. "Next? More of the same. More impossible situations, more gambles. That's the Pacific, Lieutenant. You survive by outthinking death and sometimes outgunning it. You've just learned how." A sudden horn sounded. Riggs' voice crackled over comms. "Lieutenant, report to the briefing room. New orders coming in from Fleet Command." Harker's chest tightened again. Orders from headquarters always carried both opportunity and danger. He followed Riggs to the small room where charts, maps, and encrypted messages littered every surface. The message was brief, brutal. The Japanese were regrouping in the Marianas, preparing for a counterattack. Allied intelligence suggested their next strike would be concentrated, aiming to cut off supply lines and cripple key ships in the Pacific Fleet, including Helena. LaSalle didn't mince words. "We're going to have to run reconnaissance, disrupt their staging, and support the fleet's interception force. We have little time, and Helena isn't in top condition. That means risk, again. Lieutenant, I'll need your expertise on deploying the proximity rounds in this next engagement." Harker swallowed hard, thinking of the previous night, the terror, the adrenaline, the precision, the chance that had paid off. "Yes, sir. I'll make it work." LaSalle gave a thin nod. "Good. The fleet is counting on Helena. The Pacific isn't done with us yet." For the next 24 hours, Helena became a whirlwind of activity. Repairs were made as best as possible, while the crew trained with relentless precision. Gunners practiced firing routines, engineers ran diagnostics, medics treated the wounded, and officers pored over reconnaissance reports. Every man and woman moved with the knowledge that each mistake could be their last. Harker spent hours calibrating the proximity rounds for surface combat, poring over test data, calculating trajectories, and consulting with the gunnery teams. The work was exhausting, meticulous, and terrifying in equal measure. Each adjustment brought a gnawing tension. One miscalculation could turn ingenuity into disaster. Night fell again, and Helena sailed into the dark waters, engines steady but vigilant. The stars reflected faintly on the sea, a cold, distant comfort. Radar picked up enemy vessels, their forms black against the horizon, silhouettes of death and intent. Harker climbed into turret 2, O'Rourke at his side. The first enemy destroyer appeared through the darkness, followed by a light cruiser and another escort. Helena's crew went silent, each man focused on the rhythm of their station. LaSalle's voice came calm over the comms. "Remember what we did before? Patience, precision, proximity rounds ready. Wait for my signal." Harker's hands gripped the turret controls. His mind cleared of everything but the geometry of trajectories, the timing of fuses, the patterns of enemy movement. When LaSalle finally gave the order, Helena opened fire in a coordinated salvo. The first shells arced gracefully, detonating above the lead destroyer. A roar followed as shrapnel tore across decks, crews scattered, and the ship's formation faltered. The light cruiser tried to close the gap, only to be met by another well-timed burst. Enemy fire came in waves, but Helena danced through it, every evasive maneuver calculated, every salvo precise. The proximity rounds wreaked havoc, throwing the Japanese ships into chaos. They had not faced anything like this before, a warship using anti-air technology in a deadly, unprecedented way. Hours passed in, a blur of smoke, fire, explosions, and the deafening roar of Helena's guns. Men shouted, cheered, cried, and prayed all at once, caught in the hellish poetry of war. Finally, as dawn threatened the horizon, the surviving Japanese vessels retreated, leaving Helena battered but unbeaten. The crew, exhausted and bloodied, gathered on deck, staring at the horizon, knowing they had survived yet another impossible battle. Harker, leaning against the rail, felt a strange mixture of pride, horror, and disbelief. He thought of the men who hadn't made it, of the lives he and his fellow officers had gambled with, and of the raw, terrifying ingenuity that had carried them through. LaSalle joined him quietly. "You've changed the game, Lieutenant," he said softly. "The fleet will know your name soon enough. And maybe, just maybe, this is what turns the tide." Harker shook his head. "We didn't change the tide, sir. We just survived it. For now." LaSalle gave a faint, approving smile. "Survival is a start. Sometimes that's all the change we need." The sun finally crested the horizon, casting light over the wounded, resolute ship. Helena sailed on, carrying the echoes of battles past, the weight of losses, and the fragile hope of victories yet to come. The Pacific stretched endlessly, merciless and indifferent, but for now, Helena remained alive, a testament to courage, ingenuity, and the stubborn human will to endure. And in that quiet dawn, Harker realized something profound. War could twist men into monsters, machines into miracles, and the impossible into reality, but only if they dared to act when everything else whispered to give up. The ocean was vast, the enemy was relentless, and Helena, battered and scarred, would sail forward, because surrender was never an option, because survival was just the beginning, and because some ships and some men were meant to burn brightly in the darkness and leave a mark that no enemy could erase. Harker let the wind whip across his face, feeling it dry, the salt and sweat, carrying with it a simple, terrible truth. The war was far from over, and neither was he. The horizon burned with the first light of day, illuminating a tense, silent sea. Helena's battered hull cut through the waters, each wave a reminder of the battles already survived. The crew moved with quiet determination, eyes fixed on the distant blotches on radar, enemy vessels regrouping, preparing to strike again. Harker climbed to turret 2, O'Rourke at his side, both men aware of the weight, pressing down on every decision. LaSalle's calm voice crackled over the comms. "Lieutenants, this is it. We intercept, or we risk letting them dictate the war in the Marianas. Target their lead cruiser first. Timing is everything." The gunners snapped to action. Shells were loaded, fuses checked, proximity rounds aligned. The smell of cordite and sweat mingled in the cramped turret, hearts pounding in unison with the rhythm of the ship. Harker's fingers hovered over the triggers, memorizing the pattern of enemy movement like a deadly dance. From the bridge, LaSalle studied the enemy formation. "They've learned from last night's attack. They expect evasive maneuvers, but not the ones we'll use. Prepare to execute the zigzag pattern at my mark. Let's make this count." The first salvo launched. Shells arced gracefully, detonating above the lead cruiser. The explosion tore through its deck, splintering metal and sending crews scrambling. The enemy scattered, but Helena's gunners pressed forward, calculating every trajectory, every possible reaction. O'Rourke shouted, "Another wave coming starboard!" Harker swung the turret, firing in rapid succession. One plane erupted in a ball of fire, the second twisted violently into the water. Each shot was a gamble, each burst a calculated risk that could mean survival or catastrophe. The Japanese responded with a hail of shells. Helena rocked violently under the impacts, shrapnel ricocheting across the deck. Men screamed, dived for cover, and kept fighting, embodying the strange, terrifying poetry of war. Harker adjusted the fuses mid-fire, calculating elevation and timing with razor-sharp precision. He felt a surge of controlled panic as the enemy cruiser veered closer, its own guns tracking Helena. The proximity rounds detonated perfectly, ripping through its hull, sending plumes of water and smoke into the sky. The cruiser's engines failed, leaving it dead in the water, a prize and a warning. LaSalle's voice cut through the chaos. "Target the destroyers now! Keep formation tight!" Helena twisted, rolling with the waves, dodging incoming shells as if the ship itself were alive, weaving through destruction. The destroyers came at them with lethal speed, attempting to flank. Harker's hands shook with exertion, sweat streaming down his face, yet every shot hit with deadly precision. Explosions tore through the enemy, splintering decks and sending men overboard. Each detonation reverberated through Helena, shaking the ship to its core. Hours passed in a blur of fire, smoke, and deafening noise. The crew moved as one organism, engineers repairing, medics treating, gunners firing. Helena danced through the chaos, each maneuver a mix of training, instinct, and sheer luck. By midday, the remaining enemy vessels began to retreat, smoke trailing from their shattered hulls. Helena's crew, exhausted and bloodied, cheered, some collapsing from fatigue, others staring blankly at the horizon, grappling with the horrors they had survived. LaSalle stood on the bridge, surveying the aftermath. "Report!" he barked. Harker wiped sweat and grime from his brow. 1 cruiser disabled, 2 destroyers sunk, enemy aircraft neutralized. Casualties: moderate. Helena, still afloat, operational. LaSalle nodded, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. "Good work. Every life saved, every ship disabled. That's a victory. But remember, we're not done. The Japanese will regroup. They always do. And we must be ready." Harker leaned against the rail afterward, O'Rourke beside him. both men silent for a long moment. The sea stretched endlessly, indifferent yet beautiful, reflecting the battered ships and the survivors who remained aboard. "You think they'll come back?" O'Rourke asked quietly. Harker's gaze stayed on the horizon. "They will, and we'll be here. Helena and her crew. Every time. The wind carried the smell of salt, smoke, and scorched metal. Harker closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening to the quiet pulse of the ship, the soft creak of stressed steel. Somewhere deep inside, amidst the terror, the chaos, and the loss, there was pride, a recognition of what human courage, ingenuity, and sheer will could accomplish. LaSalle's words from earlier echoed in his mind. Survival is a start. Harker knew. Now it was more than that. It was defiance. It was hope. It was a message to the enemy that Helena would not yield, that no force, no matter how relentless, could crush the spirit of her crew. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sea in hues of fire and gold, Harker allowed himself a rare smile. The battles were far from over, the war still raging, but for now, Helena had won. Not through luck, but through courage, skill, and the unbreakable resolve of those aboard her. The ocean was vast, dangerous, and unrelenting, but so was Helena, and so, Harker thought, was the human spirit. In that moment, amidst the battered decks, the exhausted crew, and the endless waves, he understood something fundamental. War could break many things, but it could never break the will to survive, to fight, and to endure. Helena sailed on, a scarred but unbowed testament to the courage of those who dared defy the darkness, and the promise that as long as she floated, there would be hope. The night fell over the Marianas, cloaking Helena in darkness. Fires from distant skirmishes flickered on the horizon, but aboard the ship, a fragile calm had settled. Every man and woman on deck carried the weight of the day, exhausted, bruised, yet alive. Harker stood at the rail, staring into the inky water. The battles had tested everything: skill, courage, ingenuity, and faith in the machines they commanded. He thought of the proximity fuses, the impossible invention that had transformed artillery into an almost omniscient force. Without them, the skies would have belonged entirely to the enemy. With them, they had rewritten the rules of engagement, turning despair into victory. O'Rourke joined him silently, handing him a cup of lukewarm coffee. "You think the world will ever understand what this little fuse did?" he asked. Harker shook his head. "Most will never know, but we felt it, saw it, and that's enough." Below deck, the crew cleaned weapons, tended the wounded, and whispered stories of the day's miraculous survival. Each proximity-fused shell had been more than technology. It had been a lifeline, a small beacon of certainty in chaos. Men who would have fallen under conventional fire had survived, their fates intertwined with the brilliance of an engineer who had refused to accept impossibility. As the stars reflected on the calm sea, LaSalle's voice carried from the bridge. "All hands, stand down. Helena holds for now. Rest well. Tomorrow we fight again." Harker sipped his coffee, feeling the exhaustion press down, but also a quiet pride. The war would rage on, and the enemy would return. But they had shown that human ingenuity, tempered with courage, could bend even the harshest rules of war. And in that moment, amidst the dark, quiet waters, Helena and her crew were not just surviving. They were alive, triumphant, and unbroken. The impossible had been made real, and the memory of it would linger far beyond the battles, etched into every wave that carried them forward. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.